Good evening, my name is Allison. Thank you for attending our presentation. Tonight we are going to discuss systems thinking concepts, and the connections we have made with the Dr. Seuss book The Lorax. So please welcome Sylvia, Mike, Kurt, Jack, and my lovely editor Karen. Sit back and enjoy the ride. Oh, before I forget, stick around after the show. Mike will be drawing us some behavior over time graphs. Our first team is Mike and Sylvia. Before Mike and I drew a behavior over time graph, we needed to employ systems thinking concepts from Anderson's and Johnson's book. We defined specific events, larger picture patterns, and driving forces that provided structure for the patterns we identified in the lorax. The 9 specific events we identified are: Onceler arrives, he discovers the soft tuft of the truffula tree could be used to knit a thneed. Lorax introduces himself to Onceler and tells him to stop chopping down trees. Onceler sells his first thneed. Factory went up. Barbier-loots leave. Birds leave. Factory causes pollution. Last tree cut down. Workers leave. Onceler gives you the last seed. Now that we identified specific events, we focused on larger patterns or trends, and changes in events over time. At this point we found the reflection aspect of the IPP approach was similar to the concepts from Anderson and Johnson. We reflected on all the specific events and patterns because if we only looked at each event we would not have identified the underlying structure that sustained those patterns. According to the IPP, the term reflection means a thoughtful reconsideration of some subject matter, experience, idea, purpose or spontaneous reaction, in order to grasp its significance more fully. We even made a connection in our reflection process to the images we looked at in the book Zoom, written by Istvan Banyai. As we flipped through the pages we saw how one's perception can change dependent on how much of the picture they saw. This is a perfect visual example of what Mike and I had to do to ensure we looked deeper. We had to ask ourselves questions like, why is this pattern happening? Or what's causing these events?
Thank you, Sylvia. Hi, my name is Mike. Thinking at the structural level means thinking in terms of causal connections. As Sylvia stated, we first identified what we believed were the events occurring in the lorax, and then identified some of the patterns of events that were occurring over the timeline of the story. Sylvia referred to a few examples of them, but there are many, many more, throughout the story that we will now discuss and diagram in several behavior over time graphs. Using these graphs will help us to see how these series of events are related and ultimately help us to identify the underlying structure that is causing them. By identifying the structures that are in place, we should be able to more clearly see what is at the root of the problem in the lorax. By analyzing the events and patterns, we identified 2 different systems that were interacting and affecting each other within the story. The first was a natural system, and the second was an economic one. These 2 very distinct systems contain the causal connections that influence the structure throughout the story. The natural system is made up of natural resources such as truffula trees and truffula fruits. It is also made up of the environment, things like grickle grass, and grass that is green, clouds that are clean, and a ripulous pond. Finally, it contains wildlife, things such as the swimmy swans, brown barbier-loots, hummingfish, and old crows. The economic system was centered on the production of a fictional textile product called a thneed that was made by the Onceler out of the tufts of the truffula trees. What started out as a small business that employed only the Onceler over time became a large factory that employed the entire Onceler family. Once the thneed was found to be in high demand, the Onceler invented new technologies like the radiophone and the super axe hacker. A workforce was mustered to work in the newly built factory and, as business grew, bigger roads were built and the market expanded. This economic system thrived and grew until the very last truffula tree was cut down and then the entire economic system collapsed. The workers all lost their jobs and the factories sat idle and fell apart. It was through focusing on the causal connections between these two systems that ultimately led us to what we believe to be the root of the problem. Although some may think it was the greed of the onceler that is at the root of the problem, the story states that he feels he is being quite useful when he chops down the first tree and makes his first need that all people need. The lorax immediately calls him greedy on the one hand, but then insists that no one would buy that fool's thneed. Greed is defined by Merriam-Webster as a selfish and excessive desire for more of something as money than is needed. Because the onceler has only taken one tree at this point and had not yet proven that a market even existed for thneeds, it would seem premature. When the first thneed is sold, the onceler does say he believes there is a chance for the whole onceler family to get mighty rich. Rich would imply that he desires to have a lot, but everyone's definition of rich may be different. Even later, when the onceler is clearly cutting down a high volume of trees, it can merely be assumed that he meets the definition of greed. He does refer to money at this point as something that everyone needs. I don't know that anyone would argue with that. His goal still seems to be fulfilling needs, as with the thneeds. The story doesn't imply that he's taking more money than he needs. It does, however, feel as if it's a case of greed, but because it is not clear, I believe there is a different underlying problem. It is only after the last truffula tree is chopped down, and the onceler's family members all leave, and the lorax ascends through the smog, that the onceler, now all alone, realizes that all that the lorax left here in this mess was a small pile of rocks, surrounded only by grickle grass and old crows flying around. The onceler then spends many years worrying about what the lorax meant with his last departing word, unless. It is when you arrive that the onceler finally realizes that when the lorax stated, unless, he meant unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot. The onceler finally realizes that he was wrong, that everyone needs thneeds and money. He realizes that truffula trees are truly what everyone needs, and the only way there will be any more truffula trees is if you care.
Hi, my name is Jack. As we look closer at the book entitled The Lorax, we can see a fictional world created by Dr. Seuss, or we can also see a terrifying look into the future of Earth if power-hungry, money-thirsty corporations continue to ignore the needs of the many and replace them with the wants of the few. The Pope has been recently quoted saying, "Just as the commandment 'Thou shalt not kill' sets a clear limit in order to safeguard the value of human life, today we also have to say 'Thou shalt not' to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. How can it be that it is not a news item when an elderly homeless person dies of exposure, but it is news when the stock market loses 2 points? This is a case of exclusion. Can we continue to stand by when food is thrown away while people are starving? This is a case of inequality. Today everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized, without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. I felt it was necessary to quote the Pope at a Jesuit institution. When we tell stories we want people to remember, we find it easiest to help create those memories with the use of visuals or fables. Giving children a look into the world of destroying entire ecosystems for the benefit of an unneeded thneed, can easily be remembered and translated into a bigger meaning, such as if you tamper with nature enough, eventually nature will leave on its own accord, and when it leaves no one will like the living scenario. In the chapter, When Right Becomes Wrong in Ellen Langer's The Power of Mindful Learning, the short story is about a judge hearing one side of the story and saying that that person was correct, and after hearing the other side of the story, the judge said that the other person was also correct, and to make it witty, a third person says they cannot both be correct, and the judge said that the other person was also correct, and to make it witty, a third person says they cannot both be correct, and the judge then says that the third person is also correct. I feel like this story in specific can be applied to the lorax and the onceler in their quarrels. In the beginning of the story, the onceler played off the lorax by only cutting down one tree. The onceler provided an excuse that it was only one tree and it literally didn't matter because it was just one. The lorax, while upset, begged that the onceler quit his axing for the sake of the trees. In this very moment, both parties are correct from their own perspectives. The lorax sees the importance of his environment as the guardian of the trees, and the onceler sees a chance for profit and entrepreneurship. And with it just being one tree, no real damage was done to the environment, according to the onceler. However, as time progresses, and with more and more of a significant number of trees disappearing, smog growing, and muck collecting, all the animals in the truffula forest can remain there due to unsafe and unlivable conditions. Most arguments begin when both parties believe that they are correct. It only takes a little amount of time before the truth begins to outweigh the fallacies and show what path should have been taken. The main point of this text is clear and is that humans need to stay out of other ecosystems because our involvement in them will be their demise, and inevitably our own. Hi, I am Kurt. As for discussing this text in terms of PME, we broke it down as so. Plan. The main lesson that is presented is a battle between environmental activist the lorax and his arch-nemesis the onceler, a greedy inventor who opened a factory in town. The onceler depletes sources of truffula fruits, and the critters are forced to leave the forest in search of a new food supply. The goal of the onceler is to produce, promote, and distribute the thneed. The onceler does not plan for the future. The goal of the lorax is to prevent the onceler from destroying the environment. The strategies that is most effective for the lorax is returning the onceler and telling to stop before it's too late. The strategy for the onceler is to make his business bigger and bigger without looking at the consequences that are not part of his system. What I know about this topic is that if bad decisions makers are in charge such as the onceler, natural resources are at risk. This task does take a lot of concentration and effort for the lorax as he continuously returns to the onceler in fear of the truffula fruits going extinct. The onceler is continuously building machines to help him produce, promote, and distribute the thneed faster and easier to those that don't exactly need. I feel disappointed and disgusted that these ecosystems are getting depleted without looking into the future. Without looking at the future, other systems will also collapse. Monitor. For the lorax the strategies never worked as the onceler continued to produce thneed. Onceler's strategies thrived until the last truffula tree got cut and his business collapsed as well as environment. The onceler did not understand because everything collapsed. The lorax understood because he knew all alone. This held the attention of both the lorax and the onceler. The lorax continued to come back and explain what was happening with the fish and the mucky water and the birds with smog. The onceler continued to focus his attention in the present day of making thneeds. The onceler's satisfaction is only focused on making money. The lorax is disappointed throughout the book because his friends were forced to move to find new sources of food. Evaluate. The lorax approach did not work at all, and in the end nor did the onceler. The lorax continued to come back and back to the onceler to stop production of the product. Once the depletion of the truffula tree, the onceler now failed seclusion. I lean that if you utilize the resources faster than the resources are being made, then nobody wins and there is no future. The new goals are to rejuvenate the ecosystem. The lorax had to stay motivated because that was his home and to his fellow friends. I feel sad because the entire ecosystem failed due to the onceler greediness. Now that the future caught up and no longer can the onceler cut the truffula tree to produce the thneed, all of the remaining species and his family banded the area, leaving the onceler by himself. But as the very end of the story, we learn that the onceler feels really bad about what he had done, and wants to try and do what's right. With that, he gives a boy the last truffula seed and instructions on how to use it to regrow the forest.
Wow, great work! Let's take a little break so Karen and I can get our information together. Those are tough shoes to fill, everyone.